The snow crunched beneath our boots as Michael and I pushed through the tree line. Fresh powder had fallen overnight, and the forest was covered in sparkling white snow. The cold bit at my cheeks and nose, but I felt excited. "Come on, Alex. I found something on my dad's old logging map," Michael said, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. His blue eyes shone with that usual glint that typically meant trouble. I adjusted my wool hat, pulling it lower over my ears. "We promised we'd stay on the trails this time." Michael grinned. "We promised we'd be back by dinner. Nobody said anything about trails." This was our routine. Michael suggesting something risky, me protesting weakly, then following him anyway. That's how it had been since 3rd grade, when we became friends after I defended him from bullies who mocked his science fair project. Now at 13, we'd spent many hours mapping the woods around our small town. "My dad gave me another lecture this morning," I said, trudging behind Michael as we followed our usual path. "Something about a hiker they found last spring with a broken leg. Said he would have died if some cross-country skiers hadn't spotted him." "Your dad has to say that stuff. He's the town doctor," Michael called over his shoulder. "Besides, we're smarter than some random hiker." Dad's warnings repeated in my head. Stay on marked trails. Tell someone where you're going. Be back before dark. The rules seemed reasonable when he listed them at our kitchen table, but out here with Michael rushing ahead, they felt restrictive. "Check this out," Michael said, stopping suddenly and pulling a folded paper from his jacket. He spread open a weathered map, pointing to a section circled in red marker. "This whole area used to be logging territory in the 1800s. Dad said there might still be old structures out there." I studied the map, comparing it to the mental image I'd built over years of exploration. "That's way past Thunder Creek. We've never gone that far." "Exactly." Michael's face lit up. "Virgin territory, Alex. We could discover something nobody in Pine Grove has seen in 100 years. The path narrowed as we continued, recognizable landmarks passing by. The crooked pine we'd named Old Man Winter, the boulder shaped like a turtle's shell, the frozen stream where we'd once spotted deer tracks. These were the safe places, the known places. After an hour, we reached Thunder Creek, now frozen solid from the cold. This was usually our turning point, the boundary we respected. "We cross here," Michael said, testing the ice with one foot. "I don't know, Mike." I glanced at the sky. The winter sun hung low, even though it was barely past noon. "We've got maybe 4 hours of daylight left, which is plenty of time to find something awesome and get back." He stepped onto the ice, arms extended for balance. "Don't you want to see what's out there?" I did. That was the problem. Despite my caution, I was just as curious as Michael. I followed him across the creek, the ice creaking beneath our weight. The forest on the other side felt different immediately. The trees stood closer together, their branches intertwining overhead to block much of the sunlight. Our footprints behind us were the only human marks in virgin snow. "It's colder here," I said, zipping my jacket higher. Michael nodded, his excitement momentarily tempered. "The trees are different too. Older." We pushed forward, our earlier chatter fading as we focused on navigating the new terrain. The snow was deeper here, nearly to our knees in some spots, making each step an effort. Birds that had been singing in the known parts of the woods were silent now. "Hey, look at this," I called, pointing to a fallen tree trunk covered in strange fungus. The growth was bright green despite the winter cold spreading across the dead wood. Michael knelt to examine it. "Never seen anything like this before." "Maybe we should note it on our map," I suggested, reaching for the small notebook I kept in my pocket. "Later," Michael said, already standing. "Let's keep going while we have light." The silence became more noticeable as we ventured deeper. I found myself trying hard to hear normal forest sounds, rustling leaves, distant woodpeckers, the occasional snap of a twig from a deer or squirrel. Instead, there was only the sound of our labored breathing and the soft compression of snow beneath our boots. "Does it seem quiet to you?" I finally asked. Michael stopped, tilting his head as if just noticing. "Yeah, weird." He shrugged off the observation and pointed ahead. "The map shows a rise coming up. We should be able to see farther from there." The rise turned out to be steeper than expected, and we climbed slowly, grabbing onto tree trunks for support. At the top, we both stopped, surprised by what we saw. The forest stretched before us, an endless expanse of white and dark green. The trees seemed to grow taller and more densely packed the farther they went. In the distance, barely visible, was what looked like a break in the tree line, possibly a clearing. "That has to be it," Michael whispered, his voice unnaturally loud in the stillness. "That could be where the old logging camp was." The excitement in his voice couldn't fully mask the slight edge of unease I detected. Or maybe I was projecting my own growing discomfort. "It's still pretty far," I said. "At least another hour of walking." "We've come this far." Michael's eyes never left that distant clearing. "We can't turn back now." I checked my watch, just past 1 o'clock. If we hurried, we could reach the clearing, look around briefly, and still make it back before sunset. Probably. "Okay," I agreed, ignoring the strange weight settling in my stomach. "But we can't stay long once we get there." We descended the other side of the rise, our earlier banter completely gone now. The forest felt strange. The trees seemed to lean inward. "Did you hear that?" Michael stopped suddenly. I froze, listening intently. "What?" "I thought I heard." He shook his head. "Never mind. Just the wind, I guess." But there was no wind. Everything was completely quiet and cold around us. We pressed on, the snow getting deeper, the light less bright as the trees blocked it overhead. My earlier excitement had changed to worry that I couldn't shake. Michael was walking slower too, moving more carefully. "We don't have to go all the way today," I offered, hoping he'd take the out. "We could mark this on our map and come back when we have more daylight." Michael paused, looking back at me. For a moment I thought he might agree. Then his jaw set with his usual determination. "It's right there, Alex. We're so close." He pointed ahead where the trees did seem to thin slightly. "Just a little further." I nodded, swallowing my objections. The cold felt worse now, getting through all my layers of clothing. We pushed through a thick cluster of pine trees, the branches scraping against our jackets. Suddenly, the dense forest gave way, and we stumbled into an unexpected clearing. The abrupt transition made me pause mid-step. "Whoa." Michael breathed beside me. In the center of the snow-covered clearing stood a cabin. Not the kind you'd see in vacation brochures or camping sites, but something ancient and forgotten. Its wooden walls had turned a weathered gray, with boards warped and splitting from countless seasons of rain and snow. The roof sagged dangerously in the middle like it might collapse under the weight of the fresh powder. Several windows were shattered, broken glass still in rotted frames, while others were boarded up with planks that had themselves begun to decay. "This isn't on any of our maps," Michael said, his voice rising with excitement. He pulled out his father's logging map again, eyes moving between the paper and the structure. Nothing. Not even marked as an old site or anything. Something about the cabin made my skin crawl. It wasn't just its decrepit state or how isolated it was. "We should head back," I said, the words escaping before I could stop them. "It's getting late." Michael was already walking toward it, his footsteps breaking the pristine snow. "Are you kidding? This is exactly what we came to find." I reluctantly followed, noting how our tracks were the only ones disturbing the snow around the cabin. No animal prints, no human footsteps. Nothing had approached this place since the last snowfall. "Nobody's been here in a while," I said, trying to sound casual despite the growing knot in my stomach. "That's what makes it so cool. A real discovery." Michael grinned back at me, his cheeks flushed with cold and excitement. As we got closer, a smell hit me, faint at first, then increasingly potent. It was a mixture of things, musty dampness from moisture, something metallic that reminded me of when I'd cut my hand on a rusty nail last summer, and underneath it all, a sickly sweet odor I couldn't identify. "Do you smell that?" I asked, covering my nose with my gloved hand. Michael nodded, his enthusiasm dimming slightly. Probably just some animal that died under the porch or something. The front porch had partially collapsed on one side, creating a crooked approach to the door. That door, weathered to bare wood in some places with peeling paint in others, hung awkwardly on a single hinge, leaving a gap wide enough to peer through. "What do you think this place was for?" I asked, hanging back while Michael climbed the creaking steps. "Logging camp, maybe? Or a hunter's cabin?" He leaned close to the doorway, cupping his hands around his eyes to see inside. "It's really dark in there. Can't see much." The sun was noticeably lower now. I checked my watch, almost 3 o'clock. With winter's early sunset, we had maybe 2 hours of daylight left. "Mike, we really should start heading back. It'll be dark soon, and we're way farther than we've ever been before." "Just 5 minutes," he pleaded, already pushing against the broken door, which groaned in protest. "We came all this way. Don't you want to see inside?" The door swung open wider, and the smell intensified, making my stomach clench. "I don't like this place," I admitted, my voice dropping to almost a whisper. Michael paused and looked back at me, his expression softening slightly. "Hey, it's just an old cabin. Nothing to be scared of." Then he grinned, trying to lighten the mood. "Unless you believe in ghosts?" I didn't answer. Ghosts weren't what worried me. It was something about this place, something I couldn't put into words, a sensation of being watched. With the door fully open now, I could see inside despite keeping my distance. The cabin was a single room, larger than it appeared from outside. What little light filtered through the broken windows illuminated sparse furnishings. A metal-framed bed collapsed in one corner, its ancient mattress torn open with stuffing spilling out. A crude table in the center, one leg splintered so it tilted precariously. A small wood stove with its pipe disconnected and rusted through. The floorboards were bare except for dark stains that spread across the wood in irregular patterns. In the dim light, they looked almost black. "What are those stains?" I asked, my voice cracking slightly. Michael shrugged. "Old water damage, probably. Place has been leaking for years by the look of it." But the stains didn't look like any water damage I'd ever seen. They radiated outward from central points, like something had splashed and soaked into the wood. "This is so cool," Michael whispered, stepping onto the threshold. The floorboard beneath his boot gave an ominous creak. "This place must be ancient. Maybe it's from when the town was first built." My breath came out in white puffs as the temperature seemed to drop further. The sky had clouded over without me noticing, the sunlight now diffused and weak. I thought about the warmth of my house, the hot chocolate my mom would make when we got back, the safe comfort of my room. "Michael, please," I said, taking a step backward. "Let's mark it on our map and come back another day, with flashlights, and when we have more time." He turned to me, his blue eyes bright with that usual determination. For a moment, I thought he might agree. Then he smiled and shook his head. "Don't be such a baby, Alex. It's just an old cabin. What do you think is going to happen?" The words had barely left Michael's mouth when he stepped inside, the floorboards creaking under his weight. I remained frozen at the threshold, one foot still planted in the safety of the snow outside. The strange smell grew stronger, washing over me in waves. Decay mixed with something metallic that made my stomach clench. "Whoa, check this place out," Michael said, his voice bouncing off the bare walls. "It's bigger than it looks from outside." I took a reluctant step forward, keeping close to the doorway. The cabin seemed to swallow what little daylight filtered through the broken windows, casting everything in a dim gray haze. "That smell is worse in here," I said, pulling my jacket collar over my nose. Michael shrugged, already moving toward the small table at the center of the room. "You get used to it. Hey, there's something carved on this table." He bent down, brushing away years of dust with his gloved hand. The dust particles floated in the weak light. I watched them, feeling uneasy about staying in this place. "Looks like names or something," Michael continued, tracing his finger along the surface. "Maybe people who stayed here?" My eyes drifted to the dark stains across the floor, spreading outward from the center of the room. They didn't look like water damage. They were too dark, almost black against the gray wood. A soft noise came from the far corner of the cabin, where the shadows were thickest. At first I thought it might be the settling of old wood, or maybe a small animal that had made its home inside. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. "Hear what?" Michael didn't look up, still examining the table's surface. The sound came again, a subtle movement, like fabric dragging across wood. My eyes strained to see into the darkness of the corner. "There's something there," I said, my voice barely audible. "It's probably just a raccoon or—" Michael's words cut off as the shadows in the corner began to move. The darkness seemed to take shape. I watched, unable to look away, as something rose from what I'd mistaken for a pile of old rags. It stood and kept standing, rising until it nearly touched the ceiling. Its limbs were wrong, too thin, too long. The skin that covered those limbs was a pale, sickly white, with a faint glow in the dim light. "Mike," I choked out, my throat suddenly dry. "Mike, we need to go." He turned at the urgency in my voice, confusion crossing his face before his eyes followed mine to the corner. The blood drained from his face so quickly I thought he might faint. The thing was fully visible now. Its face had two hollow black eyes. Below them stretched a wide mouth filled with jagged, pointed teeth. "What the fu—" Michael began, backing away from the table. The creature moved, not like anything alive should move, but quickly covering the distance between it and Michael before I could even blink. Its long, claw-like fingers wrapped around his arm, yanking him further into the cabin with unnatural strength. "Alex!" Michael screamed, his voice cracking with terror. "Help me!" I tried to move. I really did. Every part of my brain was screaming at my body to run forward, to grab Michael, to do something. But I couldn't move. I stood there, mouth open in a silent scream, as the creature dragged my best friend toward the darkest part of the cabin. "Please!" Michael's eyes locked with mine, wide with fear and desperate hope. "Alex!" The creature pulled him into the shadows. Michael fought, kicking and clawing, his struggles sending clouds of dust into the air. I could see his red jacket as a flash of color in the gloom, then just his hand reaching out toward me. What followed were sounds I knew would haunt me forever. First came the wet, tearing noise of something soft being ripped apart. Then Michael's screams, which quickly turned to gurgling pleas that didn't even sound like words anymore. Finally, the unmistakable crunching of bones breaking between teeth. The stench of blood filled the cabin, metallic and thick. My legs gave out, and I fell to my knees in the doorway, tears streaming down my face. Still, I couldn't look away from the darkness where Michael had disappeared, couldn't block out the sounds of my best friend being devoured. I lost track of time. I don't know how long I knelt there, listening to those terrible noises. Eventually, the winter light outside barely changed. Then it was quiet. The feeding sounds stopped. From the shadows, the creature emerged again. Its pale skin was now streaked with red, blood dripping from its jagged mouth and running down its chest in dark rivulets. It moved forward into a shaft of light, and I saw chunks of something caught between its teeth, something I refused to let my mind identify. I was terrified. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only watch as the creature turned those bottomless black eyes toward me. We looked at each other. I felt like it could see right through me. There was a cold intelligence in those eyes. It wasn't just a predator. It understood what it had done, what I had failed to do. I waited for it to lunge at me next, to feel those claws and teeth tear into my flesh. Instead, the creature tilted its head slightly, almost curious. Then, with that same impossible speed, it turned away and moved toward the back of the cabin. I watched, stunned, as it slipped through a broken window I hadn't noticed before, its long limbs folding and bending at impossible angles to fit through the narrow opening. Within seconds, it had vanished into the forest beyond, leaving only a terrible stillness behind. The cabin felt suddenly colder, the shadows deeper. In the corner where Michael had disappeared, I could see something dark spreading across the floorboards, adding to the stains that had been there when we arrived. I couldn't move. My breath came in shallow gasps that puffed white in the cold air. The cabin stood silent now, Michael's screams no longer bouncing off its walls. Only the steady drip of something dark hitting the floorboards broke the terrible quiet. The sun continued to set outside. I remained kneeling in the doorway, unable to process what I'd seen. The creature with its pale skin and black eyes. The way it had moved. The sounds as it... My mind shut down the memory before it could fully take shape. Minutes passed. Probably an hour. The cold deepened, biting through my jacket and numbing my knees where they pressed against the wooden threshold. Still, I couldn't bring myself to enter the cabin, to approach that dark corner where Michael had disappeared. A distant howl cut through the silence. Just a wolf, but it broke my paralysis. The temperature had dropped dramatically as daylight faded. If I stayed here, I'd freeze. I had to move. Had to get home. My legs shook as I finally stood, feeling sharp tingles through my frozen limbs. I backed away from the cabin door, unable to look away from the darkness inside. What if it came back? What if it was watching me even now? The thought sent a rush of adrenaline through me. I spun around and ran, my boots kicking up snow as I fled the clearing. I had no plan, no sense of direction beyond a way. Trees whipped past me, branches scratching at my face and catching on my jacket. I tripped on hidden roots, but scrambled back up, terrified. I ran until my lungs burned and my sides ached, until sweat soaked through my layers despite the cold. The forest grew darker by the minute as the last light faded from the winter sky. Where was I? Which way was home? I'd lost all sense of direction in my panic. Thunder Creek. If I could find it, I could follow it back toward territory I knew. A branch snapped somewhere behind me. I froze, listening. The forest had grown unnaturally quiet again, just like before, just like at the cabin. It was following me. I bolted, no longer caring about direction or landmarks. My breath came in ragged gasps as I crashed through the underbrush. Somehow, miraculously, I stumbled onto what felt like a trail beneath the snow. My feet found the packed earth underneath, and I followed it blindly, praying it led toward town and not deeper into the woods. The trail widened. The trees thinned. I recognized the crooked pine we'd named Old Man Winter, standing ahead. I'd found our usual path. I felt relieved and energized. I pushed forward, following the route we knew well. The woods seemed to lighten slightly as I emerged from the older, denser part of the forest. Stars appeared between the branches overhead, providing just enough light to see by. It took me another hour of stumbling, half running through the snow before I saw the glow of porch lights through the trees. The edge of town. Safety. I burst from the tree line beside the Thompsons' house. Michael's house. My legs nearly gave out at the sight of it. The warm, yellow windows a cruel reminder of what waited for me. What I would have to say. What I couldn't say. I shuffled past, hugging the sidewalk's edge, and continued the final quarter mile to my own home. Each step was harder than the last, exhaustion and dread making each step difficult. Our porch light blazed brightly. I stumbled up the front steps and practically fell through the door. "Alex!" My mother's voice hit me before I even saw her. She rushed from the kitchen, her face tight with worry. "Where have you been? It's almost 7. Where's Michael?" I opened my mouth, but no words came out. The warmth of the house after hours in the bitter cold made my skin tingle painfully. My father appeared from the living room, his expression changing from anger to concern as he took in my appearance. "You're bleeding," he said, immediately going into doctor thinking as he approached me. I raised a hand to my face, surprised to find scratches from the branches I'd run through. My clothes were torn in places, caked with snow and dirt. "What happened?" Dad guided me to the couch, his touch gentle but firm. "Where's Michael?" Michael. Hearing his name made me lose control. I started shaking, violent tremors that rattled my teeth and sent tears spilling down my cheeks. We got separated," I managed to say, the lie forming before I'd even decided to tell it. "In the woods." Mom sat beside me, pulling a blanket around my shoulders. "What do you mean, separated? When? Where?" The questions bombarded me, but I couldn't form coherent answers. How could I explain what had happened when I barely understood it myself? How could I tell them about a creature that shouldn't exist, that had taken Michael right in front of me while I did nothing? "I don't know where he is," I choked out. "We were exploring and we split up. I thought he was behind me. I tried to find him, but it got dark and—" "Easy, Alex." Dad squeezed my shoulder, his face serious. "Just breathe. How far into the woods were you? Past the creek?" I nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "I told you boys to stay on the marked trails." His voice hardened slightly. "James," Mom cut in. "Not now." She turned back to me. "Did Michael have his flashlight? His emergency whistle?" I shook my head. We'd never needed those things before. Dad was already reaching for the phone. "I'm calling Rob and Susan, then the sheriff." The next hour passed in a blur. Michael's parents arrived first, their faces pale with worry that quickly turned to fear as I repeated my story. I kept it vague. We'd gone exploring, found some old cabin, decided to split up to look around the area, lost track of each other as it got dark. The lies came easier each time I told them. Sheriff Daniels arrived with 2 deputies. They asked the same questions, made notes on little pads, and radioed for additional officers to begin organizing a search party. "We'll send teams out at first light," the sheriff said. "Trying to search those woods now would be dangerous for everyone." "My son is out there." Mr. Thompson's voice cracked with emotion. "Rob," my father said quietly, placing a hand on his friend's shoulder. "Michael's a smart kid. If he found shelter, he'll stay put till morning. If he's still moving, we could miss him in the dark." Mrs. Thompson hadn't spoken since arriving. She sat across from me, her eyes never leaving my face. I couldn't look at her directly, couldn't bear to see the hope there when I knew what had really happened to her son. "Alex," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Did Michael have his red jacket on? The one with the black trim?" I nodded, swallowing hard as I remembered that flash of red in the darkness of the cabin, the way it had disappeared into the shadows. "Good. That'll make him easier to spot." She clutched her husband's hand, knuckles white. Eventually they all left. The officers to prepare for tomorrow's search. Michael's parents to gather his photos and information. Dad walked them out, his arm around Mr. Thompson's shoulders. Mom sent me to shower, saying I needed to warm up and rest before tomorrow. As if I could rest. As if I would ever rest properly again. The hot water stung my scratched skin, but I barely noticed. I stood under the spray until it ran cold, trying to wash away the memory of what I'd seen. The creature's pale skin, its black eyes looking right at me, the way it had recognized me, understood me. Why had it let me live? In my bedroom, I changed into warm pajamas and sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the wall. My room suddenly seemed full of shadows, each dark corner a potential hiding place. I switched on every light, including the small desk lamp I hadn't used since elementary school. The digital clock on my nightstand read 11:38 p.m. Outside, the wind had picked up, whistling around the eaves and making the house creak and settle. Each sound made me flinch. I couldn't close my eyes without seeing it all again. Michael's terrified face, his hand reaching toward me, the wet, tearing sounds as the creature... A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. "Alex?" My mom opened the door slightly. "You should try to sleep, honey. Tomorrow's going to be difficult." I nodded, not trusting my voice. She studied me for a moment. "We'll find him. Try not to worry too much." The lie hung between us. I wanted to tell her everything, to unburden myself of this terrible secret. But what would happen if I did? They'd think I was crazy, traumatized, making up stories to cope with whatever had really happened. Or worse, they'd believe me, and they'd go looking for the creature. After she left, I lay back on my bed, fully clothed on top of the covers. Every time the house creaked, I imagined pale limbs unfolding from dark corners, black eyes watching me from the closet. Hours passed this way. Midnight came and went, 1 a.m., 2. Each minute stretched endlessly as I relived the day in my mind, always returning to that moment of paralysis in the cabin doorway. Why hadn't I moved? Why hadn't I helped him? By 3 in the morning, guilt had become a physical weight on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I should have done something. Anything. Instead, I'd watched my best friend die. No, not die. Whatever had happened in that cabin was worse than death. The first hint of dawn appeared as a faint grayness through my window around 6. I hadn't slept at all, but I got up and changed into fresh clothes, preparing for what was coming. Search parties would be gathering soon. They would expect me to lead them to where I'd last seen Michael. Back to the cabin. The thought made my stomach clench. I didn't want to go back there to face that place again. But I had no choice. People were counting on me to help find Michael, even though I knew exactly what had happened to him. As the sky lightened outside my window, I made a decision. I couldn't tell them the truth, not about the creature, not about what I'd seen. No one would believe me. Things like that didn't exist in the real world, in the rational world my parents and the other adults inhabited. They would search for Michael as if he were simply lost in the woods. They would look for tracks in the snow, for signs of a boy who had wandered too far. They would hope to find him huddled in a cave or beneath a fallen tree, cold but alive. They wouldn't look for monsters. I sat on the edge of my bed as the first rays of sunlight cleared the horizon, illuminating the streets of Pine Grove outside my window. I could hear movement downstairs, my parents getting ready, preparing for the day ahead. Soon they would call me down. Soon I would have to lead them into the forest, back to that clearing, back to that cabin. I closed my eyes, trying to prepare myself for what was coming. But all I could see was Michael's face as the creature dragged him into the darkness, his hand reaching out to me, his eyes full of terror and betrayal. And all I could hear was my own name, the last word he had spoken. The first rays of morning sunlight came through my blinds. I hadn't slept at all. My eyes burned and my limbs felt heavy as I listened to the growing commotion downstairs. Voices of neighbors, the squawk of police radios, car doors slamming outside. I changed into warm clothes and laced my boots with trembling fingers. Every move felt stiff. The memory of what I'd witnessed kept repeating. Michael's hand reaching out, his scream, those black eyes watching me. My bedroom door creaked open and Dad stood in the doorway. The lines on his face had deepened overnight. "They're ready when you are, Alex," he said softly. "I know this is hard, but we need you to show us exactly where you last saw Michael." I nodded, not trusting my voice. The thought of returning to that cabin made my stomach clench, but what choice did I have? Downstairs, our living room had transformed into a command center. Sheriff Daniels stood over a spread-out map on our coffee table, marking areas with a red pen. 3 deputies in tan uniforms clustered nearby, sipping coffee from paper cups. Mrs. Thompson sat rigid on our couch, clutching one of Michael's gloves. Her husband paced behind her, his face haggard with worry. When I entered, all conversation stopped. Mrs. Thompson rose, her eyes fixed on mine with such desperate hope that I had to look away. "Alex," she said, her voice raw, "you're going to help us find him, right?" I managed a nod, guilt weighing on me. They were counting on me to lead them to Michael, but I already knew what had happened to him. "Let's not waste daylight," Sheriff Daniels said, folding the map. "Alex, you'll lead the way. We've got additional search teams assembling at the station, but this group will head directly to where you boys were separated." Dad squeezed my shoulder as we filed out the door. The street was filled with vehicles, police cruisers, my father's SUV, the Thompsons' truck. A local news van had parked at the corner, a reporter preparing to broadcast. Michael's disappearance was already becoming a story. The hike into the forest was grim. I walked ahead with Dad and Sheriff Daniels on either side of me, followed by the deputies and Michael's parents. No one spoke much beyond occasional questions about direction. The well-known trail markers passed by: the crooked pine, the turtle-shaped boulder, the frozen stream. Each landmark brought us closer to where everything changed yesterday. "We crossed Thunder Creek," I said when we reached the frozen water. My voice sounded strange in my ears, too calm. "The cabin is maybe an hour past here." Mr. Thompson pushed forward, eyes scanning the virgin snow for any sign of his son. "Michael!" he called, his voice carrying through the silent trees. Mrs. Thompson joined in, each cry of her son's name more desperate than the last. "Michael, can you hear us, baby?" Their voices returned empty from the dense forest. The woods grew thicker as we pressed on, just as they had yesterday. I led us along the path Michael and I had broken through the snow, our footprints still visible despite a light dusting of fresh powder overnight. "You boys came awfully far," Sheriff Daniels remarked, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. "Well beyond the usual hiking areas." I didn't respond. My entire body felt wired with tension as we approached the rise that overlooked the clearing. When we crested it, I stopped involuntarily. There it stood, the cabin, just as we'd found it. Gray weathered wood, sagging roof, broken windows. Completely ordinary in the morning light. Completely terrifying to me. "Is that it?" Dad asked, coming up beside me. I nodded, my mouth too dry to speak. Mr. Thompson didn't wait. He rushed down the slope, stumbling through the deep snow, calling his son's name. Mrs. Thompson followed, her voice breaking as she screamed for Michael. The rest of us descended more carefully. With each step closer to the cabin, I got more nervous. What would we find inside? The blood-stained floor? Michael's remains? Or worse, what if the creature was still there, waiting in the shadows? The cabin door hung open just as I'd left it in my panicked flight. Mr. Thompson reached it first, hesitating only briefly before stepping inside. His wife clutched his arm as they entered together. "Michael?" Her voice carried in the small space. I held back, terror freezing me at the threshold, the same spot where I'd been paralyzed yesterday. Sheriff Daniels moved past me, flashlight drawn despite the morning light streaming through the broken windows and open door. "Alex," Dad said quietly, "we need to see where you last saw him." Drawing a shaky breath, I forced myself to step inside, bracing for the horror I knew waited. The dark stains, the evidence of what had happened to my friend. But the cabin was empty. No blood darkened the floorboards. No signs of struggle disturbed the ancient dust. The table Michael had examined stood undisturbed, its surface covered in years of grime. The corner where the creature had emerged was just a corner, dark and cobwebbed, I blinked, disbelieving. My mind reeled, trying to process what I was seeing. Or rather, what I wasn't seeing. "Where exactly did you two get separated?" Sheriff Daniels asked, sweeping his flashlight across the barren room. Words failed me. This was impossible. I had seen it happen right here. "Alex?" Dad prompted when I didn't respond. We were here," I stammered. "In the cabin. We were looking around and then I thought he went outside to check something." The lie felt awful, but what could I say? That I'd watched a monster devour my friend and now all evidence had vanished? Mrs. Thompson moved slowly around the room, her fingers trailing over the walls. "Michael wouldn't just wander off," she said. "He would have stayed with you." Mr. Thompson knelt to examine something on the floor. "What's this?" Everyone crowded around as he pointed his flashlight at a small object near the center of the room. With gloved hands, he carefully picked it up. It was a tooth. A human molar, its root still attached. And it was coated with dried blood. My stomach lurched. One piece of evidence. One tiny fragment of the truth. Mrs. Thompson's knees buckled. "Oh God," she whispered. "Is that—" "We don't know that it's his," Sheriff Daniels said quickly, though his expression had darkened. He pulled an evidence bag from his pocket. "Let me take that, Rob." Mr. Thompson's hand shook as he dropped the tooth into the bag. His eyes met mine, searching for answers I couldn't give. "We need to expand the search," one of the deputies said, breaking the silence. "If there was some kind of animal attack—" "There's no blood trail," another deputy observed, scanning the floor with his flashlight. "No signs of struggle." "Maybe it happened outside," the first deputy suggested. They fanned out, examining the area around the cabin while I stood frozen, my reality collapsing around me. How could there be no evidence? I had seen it happen. I had heard Michael's screams. I had smelled his blood. Dad approached me, speaking low so the others couldn't hear. "Alex, is there something you're not telling us? It's important, son." For a moment, I almost broke. The truth pushed against my lips, desperate to escape. But I looked at his face, concerned, rational, scientific, and knew he would never believe me. "No," I whispered. "I told you everything I remember." The search expanded throughout the day. More volunteers arrived, forming teams that combed the forest in ever-widening circles from the cabin. Dogs were brought in, but they showed no interest in the cabin itself, instead tracking our scent to and from the clearing before losing the trail in the surrounding woods. I walked through it all in a daze, answering the same questions over and over. No, we hadn't seen any animals. Yes, we had both been inside the cabin. No, I didn't see which direction he went when we got separated. By late afternoon, a small tent had been set up near the cabin as a command post. Maps were spread out, areas marked as cleared, new search sectors assigned. Sheriff Daniels approached where I sat on a fallen log, my father beside me. "Alex, I'm going to ask you again, and I need you to think very carefully," he said, crouching to my eye level. "When you last saw Michael in this cabin, did you notice anything unusual? Anything at all?" I shook my head, the lie becoming easier with repetition. "No. We were just looking around and then I thought he'd gone outside." "And you didn't hear anything? No calls for help? No sounds of struggle?" The memory of Michael's screams filled my head. The wet, tearing sounds, the crunching of bones. "No," I lied. "Nothing." Sheriff Daniels sighed, his breath visible in the cold air. "The tooth will be sent to the lab tonight. We should know soon if it's Michael's." Dad nodded grimly. "What are you thinking happened here, John?" The sheriff glanced around to ensure Mrs. Thompson wasn't within earshot. "Based on the tooth and no other evidence of blood, animal attack is most likely. Bear, maybe, though they should be hibernating. Wolf is possible. Could have dragged him off." "Wouldn't there be a blood trail?" Dad asked. "Not necessarily. Not if it carried him." I stared at the ground, unable to look at either of them. Their logical explanations were so far from the truth. Yet how could I correct them? How could I describe what had really happened? As the sun began to set, the search was called off until morning. No one wanted to be in these woods after dark, a sentiment I understood all too well. We hiked back to town in somber silence, flashlights illuminating our path. The next days passed in a blur of repeated questions and expanding searches. Missing person flyers with Michael's face appeared on every lamppost and storefront in Pine Grove. News crews arrived from larger cities, setting up cameras on our quiet streets. Michael's story spread beyond our small town, becoming regional news. The tooth was confirmed to be Michael's through dental records. This single piece of evidence became the foundation for the official theory. Animal attack, victim carried off, no body recovered. I was questioned repeatedly by different officers, sometimes alone, sometimes with my parents present. My story never changed because I had rehearsed the lie so carefully. We got separated. I couldn't find him. I panicked and ran home when it got dark. A week after the disappearance, Sheriff Daniel sat at our kitchen table, closing his notebook after yet another interview. "I think that's all for now, Alex," he said. "You've been very helpful." I nodded, relief washing over me that the questioning was finally ending. "One thing still bothers me, though," he added, his eyes studying my face. "Why didn't you call out for him when you realized he was missing?" The question caught me off guard. In all my carefully constructed lies, I'd never considered this simple detail. I did," I stammered. He didn't answer. Sheriff Daniels held my eyes for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, that's all for now." After he left, I retreated to my room and sat on the edge of my bed, my hands shaking. The sheriff didn't believe me, not entirely. But what could he do? There was no evidence to contradict my story, just as there was no evidence of what had really happened. That night, for the first time since it happened, I opened my curtains and looked out at the forest that bordered our town. The trees stood dark in the distance, hiding their secrets. Was it still out there, that pale creature with black eyes? Did it watch our search parties from the shadows, amused by our ignorance? And what about Michael? Was there anything left of him in those woods, or had he been completely consumed, erased except for a single bloody tooth? I closed the curtains and turned away. A small part of me wanted to tell someone the truth. My parents, the sheriff, Michael's family. But a larger part knew that the truth would change nothing. Michael was gone. The creature had taken him, and I had watched it happen, paralyzed by fear. As I lay in bed that night, one thought kept coming back. Why had the creature let me live? What made me different from Michael? The question haunted me more than the nightmares. Why had it let me live? 2 years passed, but time did nothing to dull the memory. If anything, the images grew sharper. Michael's terrified face in that final moment, the creature's impossibly elongated limbs, those hollow black eyes studying me with cold intelligence before it vanished into the forest shadows. Life in Pine Grove resumed its predictable rhythms. Downtown storefronts that once displayed his smiling face behind missing posters now advertised seasonal sales. Conversations at the grocery store no longer hushed when the Thompsons appeared, because the Thompsons were gone, moved 3 counties away last summer when the empty bedrooms and pitying glances became too much to bear. I sometimes wondered if they hated me. They never said it, but I saw the question in their eyes during those final months. Why him and not you? Why did my son vanish while you returned safely? The same question I asked myself every night. Even now at 15, I flinched when the heater kicked on at night, the soft mechanical groaning too similar to sounds that still played in my dreams. I developed habits my parents called quirks, but my therapist labeled hypervigilance. Checking behind shower curtains, avoiding basements, leaving lights on in empty rooms. I couldn't stand in front of an open closet for more than a few seconds before needing to slam the door shut. Post-traumatic stress, Dr. Henley explained during our Tuesday sessions. Perfectly normal after what you experienced. But she didn't know what I'd really experienced. Nobody did. The official story, the one I'd told so many times it almost felt true, was simple. 2 boys exploring too far into the woods. They separated briefly. One never returned. Animal attack suspected. Case technically open but effectively closed. I sat in her office now, watching snow drift past her window. Winter had returned to Pine Grove, the 3rd since that day at the cabin. Each year when the leaves fell and the air turned bitter, my anxiety spiked, as if the creature only existed in the cold months, as if it hibernated through spring and summer. "You're very quiet today, Alex," Dr. Henley said, her pen poised over her notepad. "Just tired." The reply was automatic, my standard defense. "Having trouble sleeping again?" I nodded, fidgeting with the zipper of my hoodie. The nightmares had evolved over time, becoming more elaborate. Now, Michael often spoke to me from the shadows, asking why I hadn't helped him, why I'd just watched. "Let's try something different today." She set her pen down. "I'd like you to tell me about a good memory with Michael, something happy." My throat tightened. Happy memories had become painful, contaminated by guilt, but I searched for one anyway. There was this time in 7th grade when we built a dam in Thunder Creek. It was April, so the water was freezing. We spent hours stacking rocks, trying to create a pool deep enough to swim in. Michael kept saying it would be epic once summer came. I stopped, the usual pressure building behind my eyes. We never got to swim there. By summer, Michael was gone. Dr. Henley nodded encouragingly. "That sounds like a good day." It was. I looked back at the window. The snow was falling heavier now. "Alex, it's been 2 years. You've made progress, but I'm concerned about your isolation. Your parents mentioned you haven't connected with any friends at school." I shrugged. "I talk to people. Talking isn't the same as connecting." What could I say? That every potential friendship felt like a betrayal? That I saw Michael's face superimposed over every new person who tried to get close? That some part of me felt I deserved to be alone after what I'd done, or failed to do? "I'm just focused on schoolwork," I said instead. After our session, I walked home through the gentle snowfall, hoodie pulled tight around my face. The forest stood to my left, an ever-present shadow at the edge of town. I never walked near it anymore, always choosing routes through the center of Pine Grove, staying where streetlights and houses created the illusion of safety. Home was quiet when I arrived. Mom was still at her real estate office, and Dad was working a double shift at the clinic. I made a sandwich and carried it upstairs to my room, closing the door with my foot. My bedroom had changed since that day. Gone were the colorful posters and sports equipment that had decorated the walls when I was 13. In their place hung maps of Pine Grove and the surrounding forest, printouts of local news articles about disappearances over the years, and pages from library books on regional folklore. I'd become something of an amateur historian, especially interested in the founding of Pine Grove. The obsession started 6 months after Michael disappeared, when I realized the sheriff's investigation was truly over. If they couldn't find answers, maybe I could. At first, my research was disorganized. Random internet searches, old newspaper microfilm at the library, conversations with Pine Grove's oldest residents. But over time, patterns emerged. People had been vanishing in these woods for generations. Most cases were attributed to exposure, animal attacks, or simply getting lost. But the explanations always felt insufficient. The bodies rarely recovered. I finished my sandwich and booted up my computer, opening the document where I tracked my findings. The newest edition was a journal entry from 1923, written by a logger named Frederick Walsh, February 18th, 1923. Mason hasn't returned from the north section. 2 days late now. The men whisper about white spirits in the pines. superstitious nonsense. Probably fell through ice on the creek. Will organize search at first light. The entry continued, but it was the phrase "white spirits in the pines" that had caught my attention. White, like the creature's pale skin. My research had yielded dozens of similar references, vague descriptions of pale figures or forest dwellers, stretching back to the earliest settlement days. Native American legends referenced beings that hunted from the shadows in these mountains long before white settlers arrived. The phone rang downstairs, breaking my concentration. I let it ring until the answering machine picked up, hearing my mother's voice through the empty house. She was working late. Dinner was in the fridge. Perfect. I grabbed my jacket and backpack. The library closed at 8 on Thursdays, giving me 3 hours to continue my research. Outside, the snow had stopped, covering lawns and sidewalks in white. My boots crunched through the fresh powder as I headed downtown. Twilight settled over Pine Grove, streets emptying as people retreated to warm houses. I passed Daniels Hardware where Mr. Daniels was locking up for the night, and we exchanged nods. The library sat at the corner of Elm and 4th, a Victorian building restored in the 1980s. Ms. Patel looked up from the front desk as I entered, offering a smile that contained equal parts warmth and concern. She'd grown used to my presence in the local history section. "Back again, Alex? Starting to think you're writing a book about our little town." "Just a school project," I lied, unwinding my scarf. She seemed unconvinced, but waved me through. "You know where everything is. I'll be here if you need anything." The local history section occupied a small room at the back of the library. Over the past year, I'd methodically worked through every book, binder, and folder in its modest collection. Today I was finishing the last box of photographs from the Historical Society, images documenting Pine Grove's development from a lumber camp to a proper town. I settled at the wooden table, pulling on cotton archival gloves before carefully removing the manila envelope containing the remaining photos. Most were typical historical fare: stoic family portraits, buildings under construction, early town celebrations. Time slipped away as I examined each image, making notes about locations and dates. My shoulders ached from hunching over the table, and I was about to call it a night when I reached the final photograph. The image was sepia-toned, slightly faded around the edges. 7 men stood in front of a newly constructed cabin, axes and saws in hand. The caption, written in faded ink on the back, read, "New hunting cabin completed. North Woods, September 1897. I nearly dropped the photograph as I studied the structure behind the proud men. The proportions, the window placement, the slight angle of the porch roof. It was the same cabin. The exact same cabin where Michael had disappeared. With shaking hands, I flipped the photo over again, searching for more information. Nothing but that simple caption and the date. I turned it back, scrutinizing every detail. The cabin looked new in the image, its wood still pale and unmarked by weather. The surrounding clearing was larger, freshly cut stumps dotting the ground where trees had been felled. I stared at the faces of the men who had built it. Did they know what would happen there? Did they understand what they were constructing? Or were they innocent, unaware of the horror that would inhabit their simple shelter? "Alex, we're closing in 5 minutes." Ms. Patel's voice made me jump. She stood in the doorway, concern evident in her expression. "Sorry, I lost track of time." I carefully returned the photos to their envelope, except for the cabin image. "Is there any chance I could make a copy of this one? For my project?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Just this once. I'll do it for you." While she made the copy, I packed my notes into my backpack, mind racing. The cabin had stood for over 100 years. It wasn't some random structure that Michael and I had stumbled upon. It had been deliberately built, had served some purpose. But what purpose? And was the creature connected to the cabin itself, or merely using it as a shelter? Ms. Patel handed me the copy. "Found something interesting for your project?" "Yeah," I said. carefully sliding it into a folder, just filling in some historical details. Outside, night had fully descended on Pine Grove. The streetlights cast yellow pools on the fresh snow, but between them stretched shadows that seemed darker than they should be. The walk home suddenly felt longer, more exposed. I quickened my pace, clutching the folder against my chest. Each passing alley and darkened storefront made me flinch. The information I now possessed felt dangerous somehow, as if merely knowing about the cabin's history put me at risk. From the corner of my eye, I caught movement. I spun, but it was just snow falling from a branch. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The sensation had become common over the past 2 years, sometimes in crowded hallways at school, sometimes alone in my room. That prickling awareness of eyes on me. At home, I rushed to my room and pinned the photocopy to my wall alongside my other research. Stepping back, I surveyed the constellation of information I'd gathered. The photograph was the missing piece I'd been searching for, proof that the cabin wasn't just a random occurrence, but something deliberately placed in those woods. I grabbed a red marker and circled the date on the photograph copy, 1897. Then I drew lines connecting it to other incidents I'd documented. The logger's disappearance in 1923, 3 children who vanished while berry picking in 1952, a hiker who went missing in 1978, and finally, Michael in 2020. Patterns. There were patterns here, if I could just see them clearly. Most disappearances happened in winter, most victims were young, and based on my research, they all vanished in roughly the same area of the forest, the area surrounding that cabin. I sat heavily on my bed, staring at the web of connections on my wall. The cabin was the key. It had to be. Something about that structure attracted the creature, or perhaps contained it somehow. My computer chimed with an incoming email. I clicked it open to find a message from Rob Thompson, Michael's father. My stomach clenched. I hadn't heard from the Thompsons since they moved away last year. Alex, I hope this finds you well. Susan and I are settling into our new place, though Pine Grove will always be home in our hearts. I'm reaching out because the anniversary is approaching, and we've been thinking about Michael even more than usual. We're planning a small memorial service here. Nothing formal, just a way to mark 2 years since we lost him. We'd be honored if you could attend. I know travel might be difficult, but having his best friend there would mean the world to us. Please discuss it with your parents and let me know. Best, Rob Thompson. I closed the email without responding, feeling deeply guilty. The anniversary. How could I face them? How could I look into their eyes, knowing I had the truth locked inside me, a truth so impossible they would never believe it? Outside my window, somewhere in that vast wilderness, the cabin still stood, and perhaps the creature still waited. For what, I didn't know. But the photograph confirmed what I had begun to suspect. This wasn't a random encounter Michael and I had stumbled into, but something with history, with purpose. I pulled my curtains closed, shutting out the view of the distant trees, but I couldn't shut out the knowledge that had been growing inside me for 2 years. The creature had let me live for a reason, and someday I would have to understand why.